Welcome to all, wherever you're joining us from. For some, it's the evening. For some, it's morning. We are able to bring this program, this global conversation on Russian relations with Jill Dougherty, to the world free of charge, thanks to all of our members at Global Minnesota, whose support year after year makes these public affairs programs possible. For 70 years, we've been connecting Minnesotans to the world and the world to Minnesota. And tonight will be another one of those special opportunities to really dive deeper into one of the most important international issues in front of us as a nation, in front of the world, our relations with Russia and the deepening ties that have been developing in the post-Soviet era. Tonight, we're going to have some special guests. I want to start with some thank yous because we do these global conversations as a partnership. Some of you know that when we're able to, we meet at the downtown, the big Central Library. Our partners there, the Minneapolis Central Library, the Friends of the Hennepin County Libraries, and the Landmark Center. Now we're all virtual, all digital for a while, but we look forward to being able to greet you and others back in that venue sometime in the future. This is part of a series, we call it the Great Decision Series, that we do in combination with the Foreign Policy Association and with partners here, the Edina Library, the Friends of the Edina Library, Washburn Library, and Plymouth Library. These are partners of ours that we are cherished and that we look forward to finding more ways of partnering on these important international and global issues. Tonight, we have a special guest, one of our favorite people in the local media and now a star of screen, at least, and some of you have caught her doing political commentary. Her opportunities extend because she's been the chief political reporter at our local newspaper. Patricia Lopez went from being a political reporter to being in charge of the political reporting, and now has been on the editorial board of the Minneapolis Star Tribune since 2016, covering everything, local politics, national politics. You'll probably see her next week. It's going to be that kind of week. And we're just thrilled that Patricia can join us tonight to moderate and to lead the questioning of our special guest. And our special guest, Jill Dougherty, is somebody that we've been really privileged and very honored to be able to sponsor and to have here in Global Minnesota's programming once a year, as often as we can. But she was started out 30-some years ago as a CNN bureau chief in the Moscow bureau for what was then a new idea, the CNN News Service, and for 30 years has been reporting a lot on Russia and post-Soviet region, but reporting from 50 countries from all over the planet. Eventually came back. She was covering the State Department, covering the kind of internationalization of the policies that were unfolding in the post-Soviet era. And she is now, among many things, adjunct professor at Georgetown and a member of the Kennan Center, which has been sponsoring speakers from Russia and the former Soviet Union to help inform the American public. And so that's an important partnership for us this evening. Her studies took her to Ann Arbor for Slavic language and literature. Her PhD, I think, might have been Russian soft power diplomacy, a very interesting topic. Maybe that'll come up in the questions. And she's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the World Affairs Council. On behalf of Global Minnesota, all of our members and our community, Jill Dougherty, we want to welcome you back. And we're really looking forward to the program this evening. Global Minnesota is honored to host you here again. Take it away, Patricia.
Well, thank you to Global Minnesota and the Kennan Institute for co-hosting this evening. Jill, I want to start by talking about Russian disinformation and interference in the last election and what's transpired since then, and what might we expect yet in this election?
Well, in the interest, Pat, of no disinformation, I will say, Mark, thank you very much for elevating me to a PhD, but I actually got a master's at Georgetown. I do have an honorary PhD, but I don't think that counts. So in any case, I'm really glad to be here. And I just wish I were there in person, but that's not going to happen. So we'll do the next best thing. And I think actually these sessions, I teach on Zoom, I live on Zoom, and I think they work out just fine. So we're looking forward. Pat and I will talk, I think, about a half an hour, and then we will open it up to questions. So Pat, thank you. I know I'm in good hands. So getting to your first question, I think essentially Russia will do something similar to what it did in 2016. And as we know, in 2016, it did a variety of things, and it has been doing that for a very long time. I think it's important to point out that this, what Russia is doing, interfering in elections and disinformation, et cetera, did not begin in 2016. It goes way, way back. And as Pat knows very well, it goes back actually to the old Soviet days and to Vladimir Lenin back in 1917. This has, using information has been, and propaganda, has been very, very important to the Soviet Union and now to Russia. And it's very important to Vladimir Putin, who, as we all know, is a former KGB officer. And right from the get-go, when he came into power in 2000, it was very obvious that he was going to make information a central part of his rule as president of Russia. So I think what they will do is they'll use some of the techniques that they used in 2016, because after all, if it works, you continue to use it. So there were a variety of techniques that they used and strategies. And I think it would be helpful, I'll try to keep this brief, but I think it would be helpful to look at how this kind of, I would call it a full court press by Russia, plays out. And it plays out not only in the United States, but in France, in Europe in general, and in other countries, certainly in Ukraine and countries that are closer to the border of Russia. So what they do is, beginning at the top, you have the government, official statements by the government, official statements by President Putin. And we can talk about that. Just the other day, he was talking about Joe Biden and Joe Biden's son. So you have the official statements of foreign ministry, the presidency, et cetera. Then you have the next step, which would be the official media. And that I would count not only domestic Russian media, but RT, which everybody knows is their international broadcaster. And so there is propaganda, information, misinformation, and disinformation used by RT internationally, which, by the way, broadcasts not only in English, but in Spanish and some other languages. Then you have, I'd say you have the intelligence agencies, which would include the SVR, and that is their external intelligence agencies. And now we're getting into a little bit more directed use of disinformation, and certainly the GRU. And the GRU, if you want to Google that, that's the organization, it is military intelligence, and they are the group that has done a lot of this kind of hacking and leaking. And that was a definite technique that was used to great success back in 2016. Remember, the GRU helped to hack into the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, and into John Podesta's emails. And then they gave that to WikiLeaks, and then WikiLeaks disseminated it. So you have the intelligence agencies. Then you have this kind of, now it gets a little more amorphous, because you have organizations like the IRA, the Internet Research Agency, which you may have heard of. They were located in St. Petersburg and probably still are, it's a little unclear exactly where they are, but they are at a distance from the Kremlin deliberately. They are funded indirectly by the Kremlin. And this would be the hackers, the 20-year-old guys who are in St. Petersburg pretending that they're Americans. and stirring up trouble. So and I'd love to talk about this, Pat, a little bit more, but that provides a layer of, let's say, distance from the government and deniability, so that the Russian government and President Putin can say, we didn't do it. We had nothing to do with it. And, technically he might be right, because ostensibly or officially they didn't, but they do through the back door. And then you have another phenomenon, which is really, I'd call them patriotic hackers. These can be people who are not paid, and they can be doing it simply because they are proud patriots of Russia. They want to get back at the United States or at another country, and they kind of join this fray. And then putting this all together is the internet. And on the internet, as we know, it is not the old paradigm of, let's say, one country propagandizing a view and trying to convince people to see it their way. It is now a very circular situation in which a bit of information gets unleashed. It could be a piece of video from the United States. It could be a meme. It could be a little bit of music. It could be real live video from a political event or whatever. It gets taken up into what I think of as kind of a vortex of information, and then gets sucked around the world and changed in different countries. Russia is very good at taking things that are happening in the United States, weaponizing them and spinning them around, sending them back to the United States to sow mayhem. And I'll end with this, Pat, because this is an endless subject. I'm actually teaching a course at Georgetown that I call Information Wars. The final thing I'd say is, we tend to think of this as, in kind of the old terms, as Russia's propagandizing us and they are trying to make us do things. It's really more that right now they try to put out flack, a whole lot of information, some of which is contradictory in and of itself. They can put out, we love Joe Biden, we hate Joe Biden is a monster, Joe Biden is a wonderful person. It doesn't make any difference. And it can also be the same thing with Donald Trump. There's a lot of dissonance about Donald Trump as well. What they're doing is confusing people and making people feel kind of disempowered to take the steps that a citizen might want to take to participate in society, to vote, to believe that it makes any difference. So sorry to go on for that long, but I think it's important to kind of get into the system as it is.
Yeah, no, I do think it's important to lay that out, and I think you did that very well. I want to ask you two things based off that. That is a multi-layered and sophisticated network that you just described. Has the U.S. taken it seriously enough? Have we taken the measures needed to counter it? And then tangentially, since you brought up Biden and, there is this Hunter Biden laptop story, and Putin went out of his way to publicly reject that story. What is the calculation there from him?
That's an intriguing question. On your first question, I would say yes, our government takes it seriously. There are robust efforts to try to, number one, understand what's going on. Sometimes it's not really clear what Russia is trying to do. And I'll give you an example. If you have a Facebook account or something, it gets pretty clear. I mean, eventually it's hard, but it's not that hard to figure out that this is a disinformation campaign. But what happens when Russia, or we've actually seen Iran, China doesn't do that much, but what if they get into, which Russia did in 2016, they get into some part of the election apparatus or system. They don't change votes. What are they doing? And it was not clear in 2016 precisely what they were doing with that. It is believed, and I am not, obviously CIA, so I can't tell you, but from what I understand from them, essentially, the Russians were trying to carry out a little, intelligence work to find out how does the system work, who are these voters, and with the idea that it could be weaponized. And certainly you have recently, within the last couple of weeks, you had that attempt by Iran and you had an attempt by Russia to get information on individual Americans. To what purpose? It's still a little murky, but that is what they're doing. Are we doing enough to counter it? I don't believe we are, but this is a very complicated subject because even going back to 2016, part of the calculus that Barack Obama had at that point, when he knew that they were doing something, when he knew that they were interfering, and he told Vladimir Putin directly not to interfere. But there was also the fear that our government had that if you retaliate, retaliation could be very dangerous because depending upon how you retaliate, you might spark a cyber war. And you don't know where a cyber war will end. Will a cyber war end with missiles in the air? Will it end with the opponent turning off the electrical grid in some city or in some region? Will it turn out that water supplies would be affected? Would votes be affected? It gets very dangerous very fast. So in trying to fight back, I believe that more can be done, but it's very complicated in how you do that. Now on Putin,
lack of retaliation seen as a weakness, though?
It can be. I definitely feel, I think 2016, there was a lot of concern, and because there was not a very strong answer, other than telling Putin directly, but who knows whether that has any real effect. But I do think that they took that as somewhat of a green light, or let's call it at least an amber light, that they could continue to do something. And we've had sanctions, a lot of sanctions. I believe that sanctions sometimes can work, but I think that has now become our kind of go-to, grab it off the shelf, take another sanction, and hope that it stops that behavior. It's not that effective.
In the meantime, they have accomplished several things. It seems they have sort of tested the fences on this to see how secure our voting system is. They have let us know that they can do it. They did enter into several states' systems, although we're told there's no evidence that they changed anything. And they see just how far they can push it, right?
Exactly. And that's where we get into these areas. What exactly are they trying to do? Are they trying to change votes? That is serious. But it appears that they haven't tried to physically change votes. But the problem is, if you change people's minds, you can change votes.
Yeah.
So,
and I want to make sure we get to the other part of this, which is
the
Putin's
Putin
calculation on the Biden story.
I looked at that because every time Putin speaks, I want to be very careful about what precisely he says. So, as we all know, President Putin the other day basically downplayed the criticism by President Trump about Joe Biden's son, Hunter, having a business and making money in Ukraine, et cetera. So what did Putin say? I mean, if you looked at the reports, if you looked at the headlines, it sounded like Vladimir Putin was downplaying or even negating what President Trump says, which is very interesting. Doesn't happen a lot. And he was basically saying, it doesn't really make any difference, et cetera. So here's what Putin said. Well, it doesn't appear to be anything criminal. He made good money. We don't know anything about it. So here's, this is classic Vladimir Putin. It's like, I haven't heard anything about the fact that you murdered your wife. I mean, I can't imagine that you would murder your wife, or, that is a bit of trolling that he does. So when I read this, I say, ostensibly, he was criticizing Trump. but I would not say.
But he
that
always
is
leaves a little door
strong-
open, right? Mhm.
Exactly. So I would say it's classic Putin playing both sides against the middle.
There are so many things I want to ask you about, but one thing in particular interested me, and that is, we know that Putin is always looking for vulnerabilities in the U.S., but does he also need a degree of reliability from this country? And I'm thinking in particular of the nuclear arms treaties. Like the START treaty is said to be close, but it's still out of reach. What is the mix that he needs from us, and is he getting it?
I think he primarily needs some type of predictability, which he does not have right now. I don't think that this administration is predictable, because you do, and we can talk about this more, but you have a president, President Trump, who is saying nice things about Putin, but an administration that invokes sanctions against Russia and takes certain steps against Russia, which almost seems contradictory, but that is, I'm not going to call it a policy. I would say that's the approach. I don't see any coherent policy on the part of this administration.
Is there any way that works to our advantage, or is that just a flat out disadvantage?
No, I don't think it does. I mean, I have heard the theory, well, that keeps them on their toes. When you're dealing with a nuclear armed country, I think some predictability is helpful. And if especially on these arms control talks about the New START, Putin wants New START to continue. We do not believe, the United States does not believe that Russia violated the New START agreement. They have violated another agreement, arms control agreement, but we do not believe that they have violated New START. And New START gives us the opportunity to evaluate and to have some type of clarity about what the Russians are doing. So I personally believe that it is destabilizing to get rid of that agreement. Now, whether we only have, 6 days? I don't think it's going to happen. There has been some negotiating, but so far it doesn't look as if that's going to happen.
Very quickly, I know that we pulled out of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Force Treaty last year, and Putin has said that was a mistake. Was it?
Yeah, I tend to think it was. I think, granted, they were violating parts of that, but that's what negotiations are about. I really believe that if you stop negotiating and you just say, you violated it, therefore we are walking away, that when you get to these nuclear issues, it's very, very dangerous. And look at what's coming down the pike. We not only have the weapons that exist right now, we have hydroponic. Hydroponic. We have very sophisticated new weapons that are being developed right now in very dangerous systems. So I think if we could certainly extend the New START agreement for more than a year, I don't think a year does much. It can easily be extended for the next 5 years, during which time you would have both sides coming together to talk about the new world of these weapons and how they might be included. And as President Trump wants, China. China doesn't want to do it right now, but over the next 5 years, there might be an opportunity to bring them into some of these negotiations.
So that kind of naturally leads us to how this administration has handled Russian relations and how that might differ in, say, a Biden administration. Can you kind of sum that up for us, please?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I guess I've made it clear kind of what I feel about this administration, that it hasn't been clear and it has not had a real policy or strategy toward Putin or Russia. So that I think the Biden administration, there are a couple of things. Biden is a predictable quantity to the Russians. He is more of a traditional politician who comes from a world of predictability and international relations. So I think, even though the Russians know that Biden, especially after 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and has been very critical of that, they kind of know what they're going to get with Biden. And I think that they also would feel that you might be able to negotiate on other things, and other things definitely would be START. I think there are other things that we could be doing with Russia that would be useful. This is not to say that we should accept everything that they do. I think we will always be definitely in competition, and sometimes opponents. But we have to take Russia as it is, not as we would like it to be. And remember, and Pat, you probably remember this very well. After 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea, the Obama administration stopped a lot of diplomatic communication with Russia. Diplomats were kicked out. Diplomatic posts were shut down, and we stopped a lot of the bilateral negotiations and discussions on various issues, even healthcare. We just stopped talking to them as a way of punishing them. I personally believe, and I think there are others who really feel this, that it's time to now get back to talking with them. Be tough.
This would be the Russian reset that's been talked about so much.
I would not use the word reset because it has too many, and I was actually covering Hillary Clinton when they had that button and they
the reset button.
I wouldn't go back to reset, but I think I would reevaluate so that we would have cooperation and competition, and we would stand up for the things that we believe and what's in our interests. And our security interests, I don't think, are served by having a country that feels that it wants to undermine us at every turn. So, I would go back to talking with them. I would reopen some of those diplomatic buildings that we have here. And it's not, paying them back or being nice to them or being nice to Putin. I think it is going to be competition and cooperation, but we have to start getting back to some type of real relationship with Russia.
Is there the animus between Putin and Biden that there was with that Putin felt toward Hillary Clinton?
I don't think so, because there really was personal animosity, although I wouldn't go too far in that direction because I think Putin is a pretty realistic person, but I do think that he was, remember what Hillary Clinton said. She compared him to Hitler. That doesn't go over well. And she also, Obama said he's a regional, a regional leader, not
minimized him.
Minimize him. He's like the boy at the back of the classroom, the sullen boy at the back. Those things were personal insults. I would stay away from the personal insults. I would just, talk to Putin like an adult, and sometimes very hard. But I would stop the Putin is a monster, verbiage, because I don't think it gets us anyplace.
No. I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about Belarus, and they have been gripped by civil unrest for months now, ever since the re-election of Alexander Lukashenko, that many have seen as a fraudulent election. Putin has talked about possibly using military force in that area. What are the repercussions of this for Europe and by extension, the West? What needs to be our level of concern here?
Well, I think the primary thing would be if these protests continue, and now they are having a nationwide strike.
General strike,
by the opposition. I would be very worried that if it turns violent, and it has been violent, but it's been violent with the security forces cracking down on the demonstrators. The demonstrators, for the most part, have been quite peaceful, and I think have been very canny in the way they've done this. Women dressed in white, carrying flowers, a much more peaceful image. But if it gets to the point, I think that Lukashenko really believes that it's over for him, and we're getting to that point. it
Mhm.
could be possible for Russia to send in some type of military aid. If that happens, it's a different ballgame. It would be Russian forces yet again in Europe. And that would remind us all of Ukraine and Crimea and little green men who were
Mhm.
Russian troops kind of in disguise. And that, I think, would be a very different ballgame. That said, we don't know. I mean, Putin can do things with a lot of deniability, as he's done. By the way, he's sending journalists to Belarus to help them with their broadcasting. So, you know, that is a way of helping with propaganda. But I do think it's dangerous. You know, Pat, one thing that I do think, we have the immediate and then we have the long term. What is very interesting about Belarus is the Belarusian people are not saying we are with the West or we are with the East, as they did in Ukraine. They definitely did that in Ukraine. They are saying we are for Belarus. We are not on the side of Russia. We're not on the side of Europe and the United States. We want democracy in our own country. And that to me is a very interesting development. And one of the reasons I am convinced that it's happening is because a lot of people don't pay a lot of attention to Belarus, but they have a vibrant IT industry over the last 10 years. There are tens of thousands of people in Minsk who work in the IT industry. This has created kind of a middle class. And so it's very sophisticated. So what they're asking for and they're demanding, it's not like the peasants of 20 years ago. This is not, you know, Lukashenko has been in power for 26 years. It was much more agricultural. Now it's a more sophisticated, educated populace, and they are making demands that are quite different. So I think
even with his nationalist authoritarian approach, this IT class has still managed to bubble up, and they now are rejecting his alliance with Russia and seeking their own democracy, it sounds like.
Yes, although I would be careful about the alliance with Russia. I don't think they're looking at it that way. I think they're looking at a man who has been in power for 26 years and who has become more and more repressive. And so what they're looking for is, they feel that vote was stolen, and they want a real vote, an honest vote. And also, another subject that maybe people can ask about, COVID is playing a role in Belarus, because President Lukashenko, when it hit kind of a massive, they began to kind of take it seriously, and people were getting sick. He actually said, drink more vodka and go to the sauna, and you will live more healthily and you won't get COVID. This did not go over well with the educated populace of Minsk. So actually COVID, I'm seeing that more and more in former Soviet countries, where the inability of the local government or the regional government to handle COVID is definitely now playing a political role.
I know we're getting close to the time when we're going to start taking questions from our audience, and I wanted to ask you one more thing about China. Putin recently hinted at a possible military alliance with China, calling it, quote, certainly imaginable. What should the US be watching for here?
You know, Russia and President Putin like to talk about that because if you go back to 2014, after Ukraine and Crimea, Russia didn't have a lot of friends. So it turned to China. And I was there at the time, and I could really see this, you know, Chinese credit cards, and we are friends, and signs in Chinese, etc. I think that they have, you know, positive relations with China. There's no question. There's more trade. They do have joint military exercises, but I think Russia realizes that the Chinese economy is so much bigger than the Russian economy. And Russia's dilemma is really, will it be overwhelmed by China will China turn into the big brother, and Russia will be left kind of as a smaller brother, except that it has nuclear weapons. It has far more nuclear weapons than China, but economically there's no comparison. And China is involved with the Belt and Road Initiative throughout Central Asia, in the Caucasus, you name it. They are in the post-Soviet space. And so, Russia looks at it and says, well, they are, our friends, but I think they are a bit wary of Chinese influence in what used to be their space.
Because it can't be a relationship of equals by definition. And yet, Putin obviously wants Russia to play a bigger role on the world stage, maybe not as big as it was in the old Soviet Union, but he doesn't want to be known as a regional power. So how do they move forward on that? I'm just wondering what we need to watch for as he continues to strive for this bigger presence.
Well, I think Putin wants to restore Russia's influence and power around the world. He grew up in the Soviet Union. He remembers the Soviet Union as a major player for good or for evil, or for ill, let's put it that way, during the Cold War. And there's a certain nostalgia for the influence. Putin is not, he's not a communist. He's not talking about the Soviet Union, but he does want the influence of Russia to be everywhere where there is a major issue to be discussed, whether it's at the United Nations, whether it's in Syria, the Middle East. Russia's back in the Middle East in a way that it never was, except in the Soviet Union. And so he wants to rebuild that power. And Pat, I think, and for our viewers, I think it's important to realize that Putin is a realist. So he knows that the Russian economy compared to the United States economy also it simply cannot compete. However, they can. That is one of the reasons that he wants to weaken the United States. He doesn't want to destroy the United States. I do not believe that that is the case, but he wants to weaken the United States and its influence. So when it sees that, let's say, the US and its allies in Europe or in NATO are at loggerheads or criticizing our allies in Europe, Putin looks at that as a good thing, because it creates disunity and that undermines American influence and power. And so, I think that's more what he does. He wants to exploit where America makes mistakes or where it is weak in order to buoy the image and the power and influence of Russia.
Do they see us as weak at the moment?
You hear that from some Russians. There actually are Russians who believe that the United States is about to fall apart. Although I think, you could probably at this point find Americans who kind of feel the same thing. That is a joke, but there are elements of this. But there actually are some people in Russia who believe China is going to take over the world. The United States is on its way out. I don't think it's that simple. I think China is, growing and is much more influential every single day. But I don't think that realistically Putin feels that the United States is that weak. After all, if you take the United States and NATO, it's NATO allies and the United States together, and if there were, God forbid, some type of conflict, Russia would not win against that power. But that's not what Putin wants. He's moving around the edges. He's not looking
for the grand conflict. Yeah,
he's using and exploiting ways of weakening the United States, and that's where we get into some of the 2016 influence, sowing division among Americans, etc. It's all part of that.
Well, I want to turn now to questions from our audience, and you'll have to bear with me because I need to focus on this.
Right.
Stepping away from the election issues seems the biggest piece of unfinished business between the U.S. and Russia is building down our nuclear arsenals. Is there a strategy being discussed on either side for progress in the next 3, 5, or 10 years?
Well, I think we got into that a bit when we were talking about New START. The New START agreement was signed 10 years ago. It is expiring literally in February. So right after the president, whoever it is inaugurated, it will expire. And if it expires, it will be the first time since 1972 that there is simply no arms control agreement between the United States and Russia. That, in my book, is dangerous, but it's all we've got at this point. There is no other agreement, basically. Yeah. So the strategy, I think, Putin has said, let's extend START, which was built into that agreement. You can actually rather simply extend it for another 5 years. And Putin wants to do that, he has said, with no conditions. The Trump administration has said, well, they didn't really talk about it for a very long time. They talked about China joining it. I think that basically the people who were in charge of their nuclear negotiations didn't want an extension. Now they're talking about it. And I think it would, for President Trump, it would look like a win if you could get some type of, at least what looks like an agreement. But I think it's awfully late in the game.
In the next 6 days, yeah. Seems like that window might have closed.
This is so esoteric in terms of how you negotiate these things. There is no harder agreement in the world than arms control. It is very technical. So to try to do that, I would say the next president, or I would hope that President Trump would just say, let's keep it in place. It continues, it keeps a little stability, and then you negotiate down the road.
Here's another one that says, where are EU and in particular German policies toward Russia most notably in alignment with the US and misaligned with the US?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, I would say economically, this Nord Stream 2 oil pipeline is something that Germany wants very much. It is now in jeopardy. I would say, the conundrum for the Germans is always they want to do business with Russia, but they have stuck to sanctions, supporting sanctions, thanks to Angela Merkel. So there's always that tension in the relationship with Russia. They certainly agree on a lot of, general issues. They have criticized Putin for the poisoning of Navalny, who ended up in the hospital, in Germany. They have criticized about Ukraine, about Crimea. I would say pretty much they are in line with the general Western agreement. But the business part of it is where Germany tends to be a little bit more open to working with Russia.
This question goes back to Lukashenko's long tenure. It says Putin has been around a while as well. How is his legitimacy holding up, especially with younger Russians? And I'm particularly interested in this IT class that you mentioned in Belarus. Is there a similar development in Russia?
Yeah, that's a great question. The other course, by the way, that I'm teaching at Georgetown is called the Putin Generation. And it's specifically on examining young people, 20 years and younger, who have grown up with no leader other than Vladimir Putin. So I've been looking at the data on this, and they're very interesting. So oddly enough, if you go back to 2018, most young people, and I'm generally, this would be kids in the big cities who are highly educated, travel, have a passport, probably have more money than young people in the countryside. They supported Putin. But I think that was kind of a general, the whole society was pretty supportive of Putin. But since 2018, the economy has worsened. You've had oil prices that fell. That was a major factor. And then you had sanctions that have hurt Russia. And so the economy in general has been hit. They have enormous reserves, by the way. They have a lot of money in reserve, so they can continue. It's not like the United States. They have, a lot. I think it's 600 billion in reserves, but the economy was hurt, and so the parents of those young people, as well as the young people, felt that that Putin had not continued to support the economy as he should have. So the support for Putin has dropped. And I think if you look at they're fascinating studies of what these young people feel. They are all on the internet. They are not watching TV. Many of them don't have TVs, so they are not exposed. I think we talked about this, Pat. They're not exposed to government propaganda the way their parents were, because they're not watching TV. So they are on the web. It's true. Their parents are watching TV, but the young people are not. And so the young people are watching YouTube videos, and some of the most influential people in the country right now are bloggers and vloggers on the internet and on YouTube. And so they are, as a group, they are much more positive about the West. They are more critical of Putin than they have been. That said, and they are more interested in the West and supportive of kind of life in the West. But I would put up a big caveat. It is not that they support some type of, let's say, Jeffersonian democracy, theoretical. It's not that. It's that you can go to the West and you can have a better life, and the banks work, and you don't get shaken down by the police. And
you have to stand in line for everything.
You don't have to say, but they feel the West functions better. So it's much more transactional than theoretical. But they're very, very interesting group.
Let's stay with the Russian economy for a moment, because I mean, if you look at the way COVID has hit the American economy, we have pandemic triggered recessions in Minnesota and most other states as they deal with this. Has there been a similar economic impact in Russia? I noticed that they have imposed a national mask mandate and are closing entertainment venues to try to curb their own spread, although I haven't been able to read too much about exactly how widespread COVID is in Russia.
It was very bad. In the beginning, they were, at one point, I think they were number 2 in the world, then they went down to number 3 in the world. Not quite sure where they are right now, but they've really been hit hard. Now, Putin in the beginning kind of downplayed it, but very quickly took it seriously. So he went out to his residence in the countryside and essentially has stayed there running the government on the internet, kind of like on Zoom or whatever version they use. The system, the healthcare system in the big cities has been hurt, but it seems to be surviving. Let's say Moscow, St. Petersburg. Moscow is pretty much okay. St. Petersburg has been hit. When you get into the countryside, that is where people have been really hurt by COVID, because the healthcare system is not as developed in the countryside in smaller cities. So what has happened, and this is one of the sad things, it's kind of similar to the United States, small business, which was beginning to take off in Russia, has been really decimated. So that it has hurt the economy. And they have much the same debate that we have here. Do you shut down the economy, damage the economy, or do you save lives? And they have opted to have kind of like a hybrid version of this. I would say that Putin has taken it more seriously than President Trump. Actually, Putin When at one point, some of the earliest video, he was dressed in an entire like bio suit when he went to a location. He was dressed in yellow. You can find it on the web. And
Wow.
he has urged his citizens to be careful, et cetera. That said, Russians are, well, I studied there and I lived there for a long time. They kind of are daredevils sometimes. So you do have people
Very
in
fatalistic.
restaurants. They are,
Yeah.
so they're in restaurants, without masks and living it up. But I do think it has been a very serious problem and continues to be. But don't forget, they have 2 vaccines that they have developed. They have not tested them the way, let's say, the rigorous testing that we have in the United States and in Western Europe, but they do have 2 vaccines. They have given the vaccines to a number of people, and they are using it as part of their soft power diplomacy. They are selling it and in some cases giving it to other countries. And I think that they are, there's no question that they're using this as an example, almost like a space race back in the 1960s. We get to the moon, we get into space, Sputnik. In fact, they call the first vaccine Sputnik, just to remind us that they were in space first.
Glory days.
So yeah, exactly.
Well, they do have some of the best immunologists in the world, and that's in part because they spent so much time developing chemical weapons. But that aside for a moment, the US and Russia have collaborated on vaccine efforts in the past, have they not? Is there any scenario in which you would see us collaborating with them on a vaccine for COVID?
At this point, the countries seem to be doing it kind of differently. Russia already has developed those 2. Who knows, maybe they will have more. But I think the Trump administration has made it clear that they're using American companies, that they are more focused on creating a vaccine for the United States. And that's a different scenario from Putin. Putin is using it, again, as part of their soft power image, that they are willing to share it with the world. Whereas I think President Trump has essentially said, I'm going to have it for Americans and then, maybe for the rest of the world.
Well, we'll see which is the better approach. Now, I want to get to a question here from somebody who seems to be very familiar with your work. The question is, in your 2013 master's degree thesis on Russia's soft power, you wrote that Russia is, quote, still labeled with the image of the Soviet Union. It is like a sports team trying to reimagine its name and mascot. It has no theme song. Moscow more often plays defense rather than offense, that they are intent on transforming and strengthening Russia's image and international influence. Does Russia have a new theme song? What is their current approach to soft power? And you just outlined some of that.
Thank you for reading that. I'm very impressed. Whoever that was, I have to find out. I don't think they have a theme song yet. I don't think they have a bumper sticker. And I think that's one of the problems, because the way we Americans look at Russia is, red, communist, hammer and sickle, the Americans. It's kind of all of these images that are very hot and very exciting and very dramatic, but it's the old Soviet Union. Right. Russia today is a much more complicated country. It is not the old Soviet Union, but it doesn't fit on a bumper sticker. What is Russia? And I think Putin would love to be able to do that. If he could, encapsulate for his own people and for the world what modern Russia is, it would work a lot better, but he doesn't have that. So he cobbles together, a little bit of the czars and a little bit of, the Soviet Union that saved the world from fascism in World War II, and then a little bit of the modern Russia, et cetera. But it hasn't, to my mind, it hasn't gelled in this, I'm going to call it PR, but essentially it is. It's kind of PR image that it could sell to the world. And that is one of the problems. It's not that easy to do that. And so what they do, if you can't say, here we are, Russia, you should be like us, then what you do is say, well, don't be like them. Don't be like the United States. And this is where I think they're very effective when you get into propaganda in just a general sense. What they are doing right now is they are saying, look at the chaos in the United States. Look at those people. I just watched Russian TV. I actually pay for Russian TV on my cable. And I was looking at it and they were talking about, images and change and minds and changing minds and all this stuff for the election. But what Russia is saying to the world, and some of this actually works, is that the United States is chaotic. They are at each other's throats. Any type that and they actually have said, President Trump, we are an agent of chaos. This is the way they put it. We are an agent of chaos in the world. We invade countries. We take over. This is a message that they are using. And sadly, it can be very effective. So that's a long way of answering it, but it is something that I firmly believe, that they look at the problems that the United States genuinely has, racial divisions, economic divisions, disparities, etc., and they play on that and they exploit it to our detriment.
If there is a change in the administration in the coming election, is there perhaps a window of malleability, opportunity, where we could take advantage of the fact that Russia is still figuring out its new theme song, its new image, its new branding, and go after, dispel some of those images that they're painting about us and trying to figure out ways of cooperation with them?
I think one area that we could definitely work on is climate change. There is no question in my mind. Putin takes it very seriously. He has talked about it. He has said he's very concerned about it. And if you wanted to turn over a new leaf, and it's something that you really need to do, I mean, we need every country in the world to take this seriously, that you could talk to Russia. They have fantastic scientists, that you could talk to them and try to develop some programs and inventions, that would, I'm not trying to be Pollyannish in this, believe me, but I do think that that is a potential area for cooperation with Russia. I also think more immediately, I would say firefighting. Russia right now is every year, it has fires that maybe are not as bad as ours, but they're similar and they are quite good at firefighting. Why not, increase the cooperation with firefighting and fighting diseases, that type of thing? I think these are the areas that could help to change the image of Russia and would be good for the world, and it would be certainly good for the relationship.
Well,
That's
thank you
a
so
fabulous
much.
place.
Yeah.
We're going to pause just for a couple minutes in the middle here. This is the end of the first part of the evening's program. For those of you who've been watching on YouTube, thank you so much for being part of this. We're looking forward to another set of programs coming up soon. This Friday, we'll be looking at the new Africa Continental Free Trade Area and the ways that Minnesota and Africa fit together on things like mining and other industries. Next November 9th at 6 p.m., The Man Who Ran Washington, a kind of a book club about the James Baker and the new James Baker autobiography, and Global Conversations in November on the 18th, looking at the Latino immigrants and their impact contributions to the Minnesota economy. Our partners tonight, you saw some of the names in the beginning, but also the Museum of Russian Art, the Russian American Business and Cultural Council. For all of you watching on the YouTube channel, we're going to say good evening and thank you for participating, being here tonight. For those of you watching on Zoom, you are members. Thank you again for your membership.
I want to get to a question here from somebody who seems to be very familiar with your work. The question is, in your 2013 master's degree thesis on Russia's soft power, you wrote that Russia is, quote, still labeled with the image of the Soviet Union. It is like a sports team trying to reimagine its name and mascot. It has no theme song. Moscow more often plays defense rather than offense, that they are intent on transforming and strengthening Russia's image and international influence. Does Russia have a new theme song? What is their current approach to soft power? And you just outlined some of that.
Thank you for reading that. I'm very impressed. Whoever that was, I have to find out. I don't think they have a theme song yet. I don't think they have a bumper sticker. And I think that's one of the problems, because the way we Americans look at Russia is, red, communist, hammer and sickle, the Americans. It's kind of all of these images that are very hot and very exciting and very dramatic, but it's the old Soviet Union.
Right.
Russia today is a much more complicated country. It is not the old Soviet Union, but it doesn't fit on a bumper sticker. What is Russia? And I think Putin would love to be able to do that. If he could, encapsulate for his own people and for the world what modern Russia is, it would work a lot better, but he doesn't have that. So he cobbles together, a little bit of the czars and a little bit of, the Soviet Union that saved the world from fascism in World War II, and then a little bit of the modern Russia, et cetera. But it hasn't, to my mind, it hasn't gelled in this, I'm going to call it PR, but essentially it is. It's kind of PR image that it could sell to the world. And that is one of the problems. It's not that easy to do that. And so what they do, if you can't say, here we are, Russia, you should be like us, then what you do is say, well, don't be like them. Don't be like the United States. And this is where I think they're very effective when you get into propaganda in just a general sense. What they are doing right now is they are saying, look at the chaos in the United States. Look at those people. I just watched Russian TV. I actually pay for Russian TV on my cable. And I was looking at it, and they were talking about, images and change and minds and changing minds and all this stuff for the election. What Russia is saying to the world, and some of this actually works, is that the United States is chaotic. They are at each other's throats. Any type that and they actually have said, President Trump, we are an agent of chaos. This is the way they put it. We are an agent of chaos in the world. We invade countries, we take over. This is a message that they are using. And sadly, it can be very effective. So that's a long way of answering it, but it is something that I firmly believe, that they look at the problems that the United States genuinely has, racial divisions, economic divisions, disparities, et cetera, and they play on that and they exploit it to our detriment.
If there is a change in the administration in the coming election, is there perhaps a window of malleability, opportunity, where we could take advantage of the fact that Russia is still figuring out its new theme song, its new image, its new branding, and go after, dispel some of those images that they're painting about us, and trying to figure out ways of cooperation with them?
I think one area that we could definitely work on is climate change. There is no question in my mind. Putin takes it very seriously. He has talked about it. He has said he's very concerned about it. And if you wanted to turn over a new leaf, and it's something that you really need to do, I mean, we need every country in the world to take this seriously, that you could talk to Russia. They have fantastic scientists, that you could talk to them and try to develop some programs and inventions, that would, I'm not trying to be Pollyannish in this, believe me, but I do think that that is a potential area for cooperation with Russia. I also think more immediately, I would say firefighting. Russia right now is, every year, it has fires that maybe are not as bad as ours, but they're similar, and they are quite good at firefighting. Why not, increase the cooperation with firefighting and fighting diseases, that type of thing? I think these are the areas that could help to change the image of Russia and would be good for the world, and it would be certainly good for the relationship.
Well,
That's
thank
a
you so
fabulous
much.
place.
Yeah.
We're going to pause just for a couple minutes in the middle here. This is the end of the first part of the evening's program. For those of you who've been watching on YouTube, thank you so much for being part of this. We're looking forward to another set of programs coming up soon. This Friday, we'll be looking at the new Africa Continental Free Trade Area and the ways that Minnesota and Africa fit together on things like mining and other industries. Next November 9th at 6 p.m., the man who ran Washington, a kind of a book club about the James Baker, the new James Baker autobiography, and Global Conversations in November on the 18th, looking at the Latino immigrants and their impact contributions to the Minnesota economy. Our partners tonight, you saw some of the names in the beginning, but also the Museum of Russian Art, the Russian American Business and Cultural Council. For all of you watching on the YouTube channel, we're going to say good evening and thank you for participating, being here tonight. For those of you watching on Zoom, you are members. Thank you again for your membership. And we're going to return to the questions. And Patricia and Jill, thank you again. Turning it back to you, Patricia.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you, Jill.
Thank you, Pat.
Okay, we're good to go with the member portion of the program.
Those of you watching on.
Okay, will these be a new set of questions that pop up here?
I think you can work from the questions that you have and the Q&A.
Okay, so I should just keep going from these questions here?
Yeah, yes, you can grab those, the ones that we have in the chat that you haven't gotten to.
Okay. All right, well, here's one that we can start with. How has Russian involvement in the Middle East impacted U.S.-Russia relations? Do you anticipate Russia taking a role, mediating or otherwise, in the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan?
That's a good question. Russia is back in the Middle East. It was very influential, as we remember, in the Cold War. At the end of the Soviet Union, influence decreased, but now they are back. And I think Syria is one of the templates for their getting back in a major form. They certainly wanted to support Assad, but I think it was also, they had a lot of messages by going into Syria. Militarily, they were projecting power in a way from far away from Russia in a way that they never had. They were involved in negotiations, and they're doing that all throughout the Middle East. At the very time that the United States was kind of withdrawing, especially in the Trump administration, withdrawing from the area, except for the Trump administration, of course, was trying to do a deal for Middle East peace, and it has had some success more recently. But Russia has reestablished the links that it had during the Cold War to a number of countries in the Middle East. Now, when you get to Armenia and Azerbaijan, definitely, I mean, I remember going to Nagorno-Karabakh with Boris Yeltsin, who was trying to negotiate. I think it was back in 2003, we went on a trip, and they were trying to bring that conflict to a close, even then, 17 years ago. So they're involved in it. But the problem is, it's become, number one, it is spinning out of control, and the fighting is very serious. Nobody seems to be able to pull it back. And the complication is that Turkey is a major player by supporting Azerbaijan. And so Turkey and Russia in Syria have had a complicated relationship. So I think what you're getting is Russia is stymied a little bit in the way that it can really pull this together. And Russia doesn't have, in that particular area, doesn't have as much influence as it did many years ago. And even, as I said, in 2003, you know, its efforts did not work. 17 years later, it did not create peace. So that I think is a very dangerous situation, because that can spin out of control in a way that, you know, with Turkey, that's really dangerous.
Here is a member question. What will Navalny's role be going forward? And this, of course, is Alexei Navalny, the Russian opposition leader. And I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, well, as we know, you know, he was poisoned, and it
happens a lot in Russia.
It does. And that's another subject. You know, is it Putin who's poisoning them? Or is it just that there are certain people that he doesn't like, and his minions do this, and he has deniability? It's a little unclear. But Alexei Navalny has been around for quite a while. He is very influential. He has organized a lot of protests, and people support him because his main message is anti-corruption.
Anti-corruption.
So he's been quite successful. Now, when he went out to Siberia, he was going out to Siberia to talk with local opposition politicians to support them. And they were actually making some progress out there. There's a lot of grassroots democracy springing up all over Russia. So that's where he was poisoned, interestingly, in Siberia. Now, then he was eventually taken out. Putin actually said, I allowed him to be flown out to Germany. Maybe, maybe not. But in any case, he ends up in a hospital in Germany. They save his life. He has said that he wants to go back to Russia. And I absolutely believe that he wants to do that. Now, what will happen to him? If, you know, will they let him in? His life would definitely be in danger. Very hard to predict what he can do, but he's not, I don't think he's as effective when he's out of the country as he is when he's in it. That said, there are a lot of opposition people, especially among the media, who have left Russia and have set up shop in Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, especially up in the Baltics. So, but I just think his influence would wane if he were not allowed to go back. It's a real dilemma because his life really is in danger again.
I have to ask you about this, because this has fascinated me for such a long time. The poisoning, why? It's almost a cartoon level of villainy. You know, they could have just shot him and he'd be dead. Why do they do this time and again?
Because I think because, you know, Novichok, which is that poison that they use, it's a military grade poison. And those poisons, like, let's go back, you know, a number of years ago, they were hard to pin down. You know, when you had the first poisoning of a former KGB person in London, you know, the initial reaction was, what was he poisoned with? How did this happen? It was unclear what kind of poison it was. And so there might have been the idea that it would be very hard to trace. And then eventually it became clear that it actually was Novichok, which is created by the Russian military and intel services. So maybe that's why they used it, because they didn't think it could be traced. But it is strange, isn't it?
Now it's become kind of their trademark, so that goes out the.
Well, remember in the old Soviet days, it was like in the 80s, there was a, what was he? He was a former spy, I think, who had an umbrella dipped in poison that was stabbed into his leg. So, you know,
something out of the Bond movie.
Traditions continue.
Here is a question question about business. So what is your sense of the American business community's appetite to do business with and in Russia? And how has this evolved during the Trump administration? I don't think Russia lists very high on our list of trading partners. That last time I looked, I think they were maybe 28th or so.
Yeah, they're very low. It's never been very high because Russia essentially, was an energy superpower, and it did not create any type of product really that we'd want to buy other than oil, gas, etc. And
Russian
Putin
dolls.
talked a good game. Yeah. But Putin talked a good game that he would wean them off energy supplies and create kind of a more diversified society. That said, they do have a very robust consumer society, and Russians would love to buy things. So I think, I'm going to read a few things because I knew that there would be some business people, and that is not particularly my area. But I talked to a few people, so maybe I can kind of cheat here with a few notes that I took. But I did want to say this. That there was a study just recently. I was talking with the U.S.-Russia Business Council, and I know some of the businesses in Minnesota are members of the U.S. RBC. So they believe it's still a strategic market, that the macroeconomic conditions are largely stable. That said, COVID has been a real factor, but, and here come the buts, sanctions are damaging the economy. A big downturn in investments, foreign investments. Falling oil prices have hurt Russia. Coronavirus has been a factor in the economy. And you've had declining household incomes in Russia because of those factors, because of COVID, sanctions, and oil prices. And then those small businesses have really been hurt. And then the systemic problems would be they still have regulatory barriers that are in place. And even the laws that they have, they frequently change, they're interpreted in different ways, and that is a problem. Manufacturing and consumption went up in August slightly, but it's back down again because of COVID. And yet, and one of the experts that I talked to said, don't forget, and I think I mentioned this in the last half hour, Russia has the world's 5th highest financial reserves, $600 billion, and the 6th lowest national debt. So it can actually, it can kind of insulate itself to a certain extent from, pressure from these geopolitical tensions. And then the last thing is we still don't know about Michael Calvey. And I think for those who are in business, they know all about an American businessman. He was accused, he and another defendant who I think is French, of defrauding a company. And he's been held in house arrest, but it hasn't been resolved. And so that was a very bad sign. And until that's resolved, and I haven't seen anything particularly changing in that situation, that is bad for Russia's image. It's bad for Putin. And until that's resolved, I think American business people will be nervous.
I want to make sure we get to this question about Crimea. We touched on this before, but this question asks, can you discuss the occupation of Crimea and what the United States could do to have influence over the occupation?
Russia ginned up a vote among the citizens that they wanted to join Russia. That was back in 2014. It was a national referendum vote, and the people voted. However, it was completely fake. It was never an issue to go back and become part of Russia again. They deliberately stirred it up, and then they had a vote, and it increased the ratings. Putin's poll numbers went through the roof. That's when he was up in the 80s, 80% support. It's down lower. Generally it's like 59%, which ain't bad either, but it really has significantly fallen. But I don't think realistically at this point, the United States can do much of anything. It is highly unlikely, sadly, that Crimea will ever go back to Ukraine. I think probably most, people in the US government agree with that they're just going to have to live with it. So it may be kind of like what happened during Cold War with the Baltic states, that we openly support them, support independence for the Baltic states in the 1960s. And now we say, we do not accept the annexation of Crimea. However, realistically, to give it back to Ukraine, I think is virtually impossible.
We're not going to go to the mat on this one. Yeah.
No, and because I don't think a lot of Americans really know the issue that well to care deeply, about it, sadly.
Well, and there's always that worry about being drawn into a proxy fight with Russia still, I think, right?
Right.
Here's a question that touches on corruption. What is your view of the presence and role of corruption in Russia and its likely trajectory?
Oh boy, the favorite subject. I have books, on this. It's a huge issue, and it is the government is so rife with this because that's basically how the system works. Crony capitalism, living on rents. That's the way it works. So I think until something changes, and I'm not quite sure what actually will change, it's going to continue. And the problem,
Jill, what happened in their evolution that they went down that path? Is it because they lack the institutions that the United States has that, serve as sort of guardrails around this sort of thing? Did the government not set up a structure that would, make corruption like that less profitable or less possible?
Well, I would go back to the Soviet Union, and you don't have to go back that far, but I mean, the Soviet Union was this closed system, and essentially it was kind of like a barter system. So there already was in place a high amount of, corruption and paying off people or giving them products that they couldn't get. There was a lot of wheeling and dealing, yes, going on, but on a big scale. Uzbekistan makes or raises cotton, and Ukraine builds missiles. Let's exchange. Yeah, it was a system that was really kind of built on a very artificial and oftentimes corrupt system to begin with. At the end of the Soviet Union, when all of that fell apart, it was every man for himself, and the government needed money. The government was bankrupt. So that's where you had this class of those oligarchs who came in, and they gave the government money, but with conditions. And you had high level of influence by the oligarchs in the system. Now, Putin came in. When Putin came in, Yeltsin, it was kind of chaotic. When Putin came in, he made a deal with the oligarchs. You're going to do it my way. You're not going to be involved in politics, or I'm going to shut you down or force you out of the country. But if you play it my way, we can all get along. That's essentially what he did. And so you have this system where the oligarchs rely on the government, and the government relies on them. It's not like Putin always calls all the shots. It's kind of like everybody is in bed with everybody else. That is the way the system works. Now, what's happening is the society on the ground at the grassroots is becoming more sophisticated, almost like what we were talking about in Belarus, except Russians are actually very sophisticated, especially in the big cities. And the younger generation, and many, let's say 40, 50-year-olds also are saying, we're sick of this. We are sick of this, and we don't want it to happen. You've had certain protests that have been breaking out on a local grassroots basis, on local issues. Sometimes it's corruption, other times it's just kind of a local, the park that they want to get improved or whatever. But there's a nascent, I think, democratization that's springing up from the bottom. And Putin is finding that harder to deal with. So he's brought in some, local leaders who are kind of technocrats, who aren't as corrupt, and it's changing. But I don't think that you can change that system overall, because, and we could go on all night about this, but where it gets really dangerous is in the countries that are the countries of the former Soviet Union, especially in Eastern and Central Europe, and even in Europe itself, where Russian businesses go in, they buy up local businesses. When they buy up the local businesses with corruption, no question, they buy up the local politicians. And then the local or national politicians pass laws that help to increase this corruption and help to, grease the skids for Russian business in those countries. So the spread of corruption is huge. Look at what's happening in London. There's a lot of very dirty Russian money in London with real estate, et cetera. So I think it's not only a threat to Russia, it's a threat to the entire system, and it's a threat to the United States as well.
Yeah, well, but it's so baked in after 40 years and, even predating that.
Yes, and Pat, your point is really fast. Your point about the institutions, you're absolutely right, because the institutions that might keep that in check. I mean, we have institutions that don't always work, but at least they're there, and we have less corruption probably than most countries. They don't have those institutions, or if they do, they're just kind of beginning, like the legal system and lawyers and transparency and things like that. They just don't have the system that could,
which is a huge hindrance. Yeah, and that's a huge hindrance to the U.S. companies that might want to do business with them, right? That is part of the prepay for their corruption.
Michael Calvey is a perfect example.
Yeah,
the businessman,
yeah. Who would
American businessman?
That's a level of risk I think most business people don't want to take on. This question says, many Georgetown grads go on to careers in the Foreign Service and intelligence work. With Trump seen as favoring Putin over U.S. intel community on some issues, how has morale and interest in these careers been affected, if at all?
Oh, boy, that is a very interesting question. I went to Georgetown, but I also went to the University of Michigan, and I was back at Michigan about a year and a half ago, I think it would be, maybe it's 2 years, talking with students about that very subject. And unfortunately, some of them, at least at that point, were very, very wary of getting into the Foreign Service because they felt that the Foreign Service, I have to just say exactly what they were telling me, they felt that the Foreign Service was being dismantled and that diplomacy was denigrated by this administration. And a number of them were saying, do I have a career in the diplomatic sphere? And they were thinking, what do I do? Do I go with the business? What do I do? I do think, Georgetown and where I teach is the School of Foreign Service. So people will continue to do that. And I do think, the concept of the Foreign Service has broadened. You have civil society and NGOs and other organizations, healthcare, civil rights, citizens' rights, human rights, et cetera, where people can get jobs. But I think it is not an easy time for young people in the diplomatic field.
With as much experience as you've had in so many countries and seeing what diplomacy can achieve, what are the prospects for rebuilding that? I mean, we know that the State Department's been basically hollowed out, same with the Foreign Service specifically. I mean, is this months, years, decades?
I think it'll be years, definitely. I think you'd have to start putting, filling the jobs that have been left open,
left empty,
or filled with temporary people, which is not the same as having a permanent person with responsibility in those jobs. Even the ambassadors, we don't have ambassadors to a number of countries. It's insane. So I think that it's a real challenge. I think if Trump is reelected, it probably will continue because that seems to be, the way that he wants it. I think if Biden is elected, that he will have a major task to rebuild that, especially the State Department and other departments and agencies of the US government.
Well, I think we might have time for only one more question, and this one is coming in hot. It says, is there any connection between Russian oligarchs and Trump businesses?
Oh boy, that is, okay.
A little hand grenade for your last question.
I don't know. We don't know. I can tell you that if you look at the people that were dealing with the Trump administration in 2016, many of them came from that business world. Trump wanted to build a hotel in Moscow, and he was never able to do it, which is my question. Like he built hotels all over the world. Why didn't he get it done in Moscow? That's what I would want to know. But I do think that you've had this nexus between business people in Russia and people with the Trump administration. Trump's own son said that they got a lot of money from investments by Russians.
Is Deutsche Bank figuring into this at all?
Deutsche Bank definitely figures into it, but this is being investigated right now. So I do not know, but I can tell you, if you just look at the people who are involved, they come from much the same world, which is business guys, pretty, tough business guys on both sides. And so I think there's an understanding of each other that could certainly influence things, but I think it's a similar mindset. World is a tough place, and you have to be tough to survive. And that's where I see this combination, especially, the connection on real estate.
It's a really great place to end this fabulous conversation, although ending it sounds crazy. We have so many more things to talk about. And Jill, of course, we want to have you back here, and Patricia and I will be talking about these things that you're bringing up. But again, tonight, all of you who've been watching for this special members only section, you are the people who keep Global Minnesota strong and make it possible for this to be offered clear around the world. We now have people watching in our programmings from every corner of the planet. And we want you to know about the website where you can get information about the upcoming webinars and other great conversations and global conversations. One coming up quickly, coming on Friday at noon about the new Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We'll be looking especially at Minnesota's connections with mining there. We'll be going over that James Baker book, the new biography that's come out, and we'll be looking at the impact of immigrants from Mexico and Latin America on the Minnesota economy. Lots of things there, including all of the recordings from our fabulous World Food Day program and that special opening of the exhibit down at the Mall of America, where you can see about when Minnesota fed all the children of China, all the children of Europe 100 years ago. So thank you again, Jill. Thank you, Patricia, and thank you to everyone watching, and thanks to the team at Global Minnesota that makes this all happen in the background, all the magic. That's due to that fabulous staff that we have at Global Minnesota. Good night, everyone. Good evening. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Jill.